Imagine growing up with a legend, a voice that defined generations. But what happens when that legend faces a challenge that affects us all? Today, I sit down with Antonia and Johanna Bennett, daughters of the iconic Tony Bennett, and we step behind the curtain of their extraordinary life. We explore the unique dynamics of their family, the unspoken complexities, and the deeply personal journey of navigating their father's battle with Alzheimer's. We dive into the fascinating question of how Tony's incredible discipline, his ingrained habits, and the power of muscle memory allowed him to continue sharing his gift with the world even as the disease progressed. This isn't a story about a famous name, it's a story about family, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Get ready to be moved, inspired, and maybe to see Tony Bennett in a new way you've never seen him before. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Welcome to Fading Memories, listeners. I'm Jen Fink, your host. I have 2 special guests with me today, Antonia and Johanna Bennett. You might recognize that last name because their father was the famous Tony Bennett, and they're here to tell their story of their journey of Alzheimer's with their famous dad. So thanks for joining me, ladies.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, you're going to have to remind me, we're going to start at the end and work backwards a little bit. What year did your dad pass away again? I think I could remember that.
It was on 2 years ago now.
Yeah, July or no, he died about 2.5 weeks shy of his 97th birthday.
That was what year?
That was a year and a half, almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had a feeling my mom's been gone for 5 years.
Mhm.
So, it doesn't feel like 5 years. So I don't know. I have a strange relationship with time between COVID and my parents and moving and just my touch points with like time markers is weird. So where should we begin? We were chatting. They thought we were recording. We were talking about how Antonia traveled with her dad while he was still performing while he had Alzheimer's. So when did he get an official diagnosis? So he died in 2023?
He got an official diagnosis in 2016.
Okay. So he lived a pretty long time with it. I haven't talked to too many people who live with it as long as my mom, but my mom was much younger, so that makes a difference. Did you notice changes before the diagnosis? I'm assuming that would be a yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, well, with our dad, there was always cognitive issues. We were just doing another podcast with a neurologist, and we talked kind of more extensively about that. But there were some head injuries during the war. Car flipped. He was in a Jeep. It flipped over. He hit his head. There was another one when he was younger, and there's also like kind of neuroprocessing, dyslexia, ADD type of things that's kind of very prevalent in our family. But looking back on things, it's all kind of part of it with dad. So there were always kind of cognitive issues, and speaking of not being good with time, he was also like in particularly not good with time. Like the way that he would remember the timing of things was always kind of wonky. I lived for many years in a crazy, incredible New York apartment deal of rent stabilization, and he would sometimes get upset at me because that apartment was on Central Park South that I was paying like something like $800 a month for a gigantic 1-bedroom with a fireplace in a great neighborhood. And he was like, he had moved to fancy Central Park South with the view of the park and the whole thing. And he would get mad at me for something. He'd be like, you've lived on Central Park South for like 20 years. And I'd be like, well, no, actually, Dad, I've lived here for 6 years at that point. Like that kind of a thing. But yeah.
Always had kind of a very selective memory, in the sense that sometimes he would be completely spot on and his instincts would be incredible, and he'd remember things crystal clear. And then there were other things that just maybe were not so accurate.
Yeah.
Do you
And
think that's maybe
he would also do things that I would kind of maybe like that were like a kind of akin to self-medicating. Like, he wasn't taking anything or eating anything, but for example, if he was on an airplane, or if he had like 10 minutes or something like that, he had these notebooks where he was constantly writing lyrics to songs that he had been singing for 40, 50, 60 years over and over and over again, so he didn't go up on his lines during a show. And that was just so that he was, and it's basically, there was one at a certain point he went back to an old set list from like 1965. There was some live record that I remember picking up and looking at the order of the songs and the songs on it, and I was like, Dad, this is your set list now, and that was in the 90s or early 2000s that he had flipped it back over to 1965. So you would think that he would just remember those songs, but even if he did, he didn't think that he would. So he was doing that all of the time.
He did a lot of things that were repetitive. He
He was
was
very disciplined with that.
he would
this is always?
Yes, he would read the same books over and over and underline the same spot of things that he felt that were important. He would go over lyrics or set lists or whatever it was, but he was constantly curious about things, and he also really systematically needed structure and repetition.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I'm a retired photographer, so I have a very creative brain, and I'm thinking a lot of what you described sounds a lot like a creative brain.
Mm-hmm.
That's gonna noodle around in my brain for a while, because I don't like repetition. I don't read the same books, but I like structure, so that it's almost like guardrails, so that all the creativity can happen within like a contained environment, or else it just explodes everywhere.
Yeah, that's like an ADD thing though, too, right? So
He used to say that, because of his painting, he would say, there are two words to free in the saying free form. And the first, and one of the words is form. And so he would always say, you can be free, but you have to understand and know about form in order to do so. And that's really how he felt in music and in art.
definitely in music. He would tell that April in Paris Miles Davis joke all the time. And it was, and the joke was something that really happened, which was Miles Davis was doing a gig somewhere, and he asked for, at a certain point in the show, he stopped and he said, does anybody want to hear anything specific? He asked for the audience to call out tunes, and this woman said, oh, please play April in Paris. And he looked at her and said, lady, that was April in Paris.
That's funny.
So, free form, right?
That's wild. So, did you always travel with your dad, or Antonia?
From early on, we would go, Joanna and I, as kids, would go up and meet him in San Francisco at the Fairmont Hotel where he had a residency, or in Vegas or Tahoe. And we did always travel. In the summers, we would travel all around. And
Yeah.
um,
When our parents were married, it was basically a constant travel until I think up until I had to go to school. So, and even then I was being pulled out of school and we were on the road different places. Yeah.
I think travel is very educational, so I'm not so sure that's a bad thing.
No, I don't think it was either. I'm actually to this day more comfortable in a hotel room than anywhere else.
So you said he was diagnosed in 2016, if I remember correctly. When did you guys start noticing that his like creative idiosyncrasies were getting more weird?
well, I mean, I think, when somebody gets older, you start to wonder, like, is this just like getting older stuff, or is this something else?
A lot of it, well, I just want to clarify something for you because it sounds like timing of certain things is important for you in this conversation. Um, we were not informed of our father's diagnosis.
I
We
can
found
relate.
out, yeah, we found out our father had Alzheimer's basically when you did. There were some kind of hints from the powers that be or that were in his life. But we weren't sure if that was just an offhanded comment, like, oh, he's got Alzheimer's, like, oh, his brain's going, or if it was a diagnosis. So we didn't find out, and to this day, we've never spoken to any of his doctors. That we haven't been allowed to. So it's unfortunate, but what I can kind of glean from that is to further answer your question, um the stuff and the progression of dad getting older and now looking back going, oh, that was the Alzheimer's, that wasn't just old stuff,
Right.
and then some of it the reverse, some of it was just older stuff and not the Alzheimer's, you know.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So was there a reason that they kept it from you? Was that his desire or that just family dynamics?
It was family dynamics and politics and money stuff, and we don't need to talk about any of that here.
Yeah, it's like all the fun family things. I can
Yeah.
like I think Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia just seem to bring out the worst in some families. It's really unfortunate.
It's horrible, it's horrible. Yeah.
So Antonia said you were traveling with your dad. You want to tell us what that was like? That sounds really fascinating to me.
Well, I mean, it was great to be able to spend all that time with him, and he was so good at what he was doing. Even as a person with Alzheimer's, he was still able to hit all those notes and perform well. And
Yeah, he also couldn't really hear very well in the end, and it was like this incredible testament to his capacity and his vocal training, which again he was unbelievably disciplined at. There wasn't a day that he didn't do his scales, and sometimes twice a day on a show day, that kind of a thing. And all the muscle memory and everything was there.
Yeah, that's what I find fascinating. You said you were talking to a neurologist earlier about your dad. Did they give any insight as to why they think that he was, and I think you guys have nailed it, but why he was able to perform so long with Alzheimer's? I mean, my mom forgot she had breakfast most days.
You know something? I remember Antonia and I having conversations as tweens and teens saying, you know, the second that he has to stop for any reason, that like that'll be it. Like, I mean, it was like he took energy from the audience. And yeah.
That's interesting because I think so. He had really super ingrained muscle memory and
But he
discipline.
got incredible training.
Mm-hmm.
He had incredible bel canto training. That was bel canto before there's a kind of lineage of operatic training called bel canto that a really close friend of ours in Italy is now trying to recover because they feel that it was he and a bunch of Italian intellectual opera people feel that the lineage was broken. And he would he would say like, yeah, but your dad bel canto when? And I was like, well, it had to have been in the 40s, in the 30s. You know, and he was like, oh yeah, so he got the real bel canto. And if you listen to a Tony Bennett record from the first 20 years of his career to a Tony Bennett record towards the end, his voice is somehow, as it got older, somehow stronger, somehow kind of I don't know, Antoni, like a wider and deeper sound. And so it's just, you know, it's like he had this, it was like this training that was so extraordinary. And it wasn't just that, it was his utter diligence and discipline with it.
I think the discipline, like the stuff you're saying that he did every day,
Mm-hmm.
you know, most people with Alzheimer's start losing the short-term memory and they kind of work backwards. So since he had the same kind of routine every day and all that incredible discipline that you're talking about, I think that was like probably the most severe muscle memory I think I've ever had somebody describe. And then most people know that music fires up all the regions of the brain. And even for somebody who has a brain disease,
Yeah.
obviously you've got more capacity if more parts of it are functioning at once. Art and creativity are the only thing that fires up all the ranges of the brain, as far as I know. I've talked to too many neurologists in my life. I keep telling people I'm a creative artist person. I shouldn't know how to pronounce some of these words or know these things. It's like I could have lived my whole life without knowing all this stuff. But I think that's, you know, it's really interesting because everybody, you know, reading in the paper, you know, that he'd been performing with Alzheimer's. And I remember reading that, you know, you guys as a family and, you know, I'm sure his agents and all the people around him were concerned that when he had to stop, it would be the end. And it sounds like that kind of was the case.
It's the second that he got off the road that he was, and by the way, I think if not for COVID, we probably would have had him another 10 years. But it, you know, it was like COVID happened, you know, and he was home. And even when he was home, he was still doing a show in his living room. Just as his like kind of cognitive therapy, right? But he was doing his 90-minute show every day in his living room with his piano player would come over and do it. But yeah, it was as we predicted when we were young, just like pretty direct decline.
I just find that really interesting. And it kind of, I was having a conversation with somebody earlier. Their mom died from COVID. And it was one of those things where all the powers that be did all the right things or all the wrong things for the right reasons. Obviously, I think that kind of affected your dad as well. But we were talking about, she's also had a couple of concussions. And so she's worried about like concussion protocol. And I made the comment that I'm pretty sure the concussion protocol would be to do all the lifestyle things that they tell you we should do, you know, exercise, eat right, don't smoke, don't drink, all those things that people like resist doing, and not having or significantly reducing your risk of dementia or any kind of dementia is worth making those lifestyle changes to me. You guys don't know this. Most of my audience should. My mom had Alzheimer's for at least 20 years. Her mom had vascular dementia, and my maternal great grandmother also had dementia. So, my previous nail gal kept saying, Vietnamese culture says there won't be a fourth generation, but I'm not taking the risk, and I do all of the lifestyle stuff every day. And if it sounds like, because they also talk about routines, how it's really important for somebody with any form of dementia, but your dad obviously exemplifies how having like really defined way of managing your day-to-day life for decades is really good for your brain. I'm not sure I've talked to anybody that said anything along those lines. So I find that really interesting. Which is why I wanted to talk to you guys, because I knew there was going to be some really interesting stories that people hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
I've also, oh, go ahead, honey.
He also played tennis, and a lot of people say that racket sports are like one of the number one things that are, as far as sports go, that are good for your brain. The doctor, Daniel Amen, talks about that, how people play racket sports live longer.
Now you're going to make me want to take up pickleball. I don't have depth perception. I have a really wacky vision. So balls coming at me, I usually just like duck. So I'm not really a good racquetball player.
I've also heard that dancing.
I do cycling, and that requires balance. And I think what I've learned,
thing for your brain, like if you're picking up you're doing new dance routines and things like that.
So all those TikTok dances, people should just keep doing those.
Also those, yeah, but might be a fun thing to do in a class.
That's true. I have crappy knees, so I like cycling. I do the weight training. You're in New York. I was in Princeton in September, but I made sure, because I have not actually visited New York, even though my husband is from Staten Island. I'm like, I am getting off the red-eye flight from Sacramento to Newark, and I'm going into the city to the Peloton studio.
Okay.
I don't have time to do other things. It was raining the whole weekend I was there, so seeing the statue was not photographically worth the time. And it's like that's my daily routine. Weekends I'm out cycling in the Sierra foothills, which is I'm not used to it yet. Still working on that. But the balance that you have to do, and paying attention to the traffic, and that all helps your brain. But I can see how racket sports, because you got to watch, there's the tracking of the ball and the movements, and there's more involved in that than like say swimming, or even, well, maybe not. I think a little bit more than dancing, but
I don't know. Both Antonia and I were dancers when we were young, so we kind of have like different perspectives on dance. I've just heard that like people that take up, like Latin dance or something like that, when they're starting to feel like they're having cognitive issues, that the cognitive issues either go away or they get greatly reduced. But
it's supposed to be like a thing of difference. So if you've always been dancing ballet, then you should take up flamingo dancing.
Yeah,
if you play the piano, then you pick up the violin. Or if you don't know how to read music, sight reading is supposed to be really good. But it's supposed to be doing something different and getting your brain to work in a way that it's not used to, that helps to engage learning a foreign language that you don't speak. All of those type of things are supposed to engage the brain, I guess.
It actually helps build new neurons. Again, information I did not need to have in my life, but I know these things. And so like for dancing, so you're learning new choreography, you're engaging more regions of the brain because it's creative. You got the music, you got the movement, which is good for your, your vascular system. So I can see all of that. I swear. I say this a lot. If I was half my age and had twice the capacity for science, I would so go into brain research because I find it really fascinating. I think I've maxed out on like my abilities. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I should check into it, but I really don't need a fifth career at 58. So
Maybe you should just write some stuff down and go from there.
I am working on a book. I was just, again, telling the same person I need a cable to plug into my brain so I can download my book because it's all in my brain. I started writing it chronologically and then I got confused and it was like, this is terrible. If I'm confused, nobody else is going to follow this. It's just going to be garbage. So
You just need like an intern or an assistant or something, which I call mine my ADD coach. So that's what I.
So that's one thing that you brought up is you said is there a lot of ADD in your family?
I believe so, yeah.
So you have ADD, Johanna?
Yeah, I probably ADHD. Antonia has had her thing with it too. There's a kind of audio processing thing that can happen. You could say something and I'll say, "What did you say?" And this is Antonia's description. I'm just repeating her stuff, but I'll say like, what did you say?" And then right before you answered me again, I've already heard you. So it's a weird thing, like when we were dancing and stuff, when we were younger, I would learn some choreography absolutely perfectly, and then like the next day it was like it wasn't there and I had never seen it or heard it, like that kind of a thing. Or sometimes I could do it once and then in the same class I could do the choreography once and then the second or the third time it wasn't there anymore and I was just following.
Interesting.
Yeah.
My daughter's got self-diagnosed ADD. And from what I've read and what she's explained, and obviously my experiences with her, I don't disagree with her self-diagnosis. Did your dad have ADHD?
I think so. I think there was a lot. That he would have never gone and gotten a diagnosis for anything like that. I mean, it's
our need because he was done with school.
yeah.
And, at that time they didn't, you just kind of.
Because a diagnosis back then probably wouldn't have been for the better.
Yeah. My mom was telling me about one of her brothers. I think it's Uncle Delvin, that he basically dropped out of school when he was very young. Like probably somewhere in elementary school, he probably dropped out, but they were from rural Louisiana. So he could go do that and then go work on farms and do other things. But she said he had he was a very bright guy and he just couldn't figure out how to read and he was super super dyslexic. And so he went and made a life for himself where he didn't have to do those kinds of things. It was just,
Yeah, if it's hard to, I know people with dyslexia can learn to read, but it's never enjoyable. Like I love reading.
I don't know. I mean, we're talking about a guy that was getting educated in the 30s and the 40s, right? So
they probably weren't super flexible on different learning styles.
yeah.
They're still not super flexible. They're just a little bit better these days. So it sounds like your family at large generally has like neurotypical brain, not neurotypical, is the right word.
Divergent.
Thank you. I swear, my brain does not want to work today. I think it's the brain. Enough brain.
neurodivergent.
You're probably neurodivergent too. Yeah.
I think, well, I've thought for a long time, one of my photography clients had a very severely autistic son. And between caring for my mom with Alzheimer's and learning how to navigate what she wanted from me with him was interesting. Because of my mom, it was easier to take a step back and be a lot more empathetic than I might have been previous, which is, I guess, a good thing. But sometimes I feel like, oh, man, good thing my mom came around for that one. But that's kind of when I learned it's like, there is not like, this is how brains are supposed to be. There's just a whole rainbow of options. And I've always said, they say, well, space is our final frontier. No, brains are our final frontier. When they figure those things out, it'll be a whole different world. I will not be around by then, even though I intend to live to be 103 like my paternal grandmother.
Wow.
Yeah, so I lost my mom on March 31st, 2020, our oldest dog in November of 2020, and my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, my last grandparent, April of 2021. So it was kind of a rough 53 weeks on top of all the COVID craziness. And, it was interesting because she was very visual. She liked to paint. She's also very creative, very smart. And she lost most of her eyesight to glaucoma, mostly in 2005. She got glaucoma when I was 12. So that was like 1978. And in 2005, she fell and damaged the retina in the good eye. So from 2005 on, she was pretty much blind. And then at like 102, she got like really hard of hearing. And I thought, oh, that's got to be a nightmare. You can barely see, you can barely hear. It's like being in solitary confinement in your own brain. I was like, no, thank you. And so she managed to live about a year and a half after that. And, 103 is good. No complaint.
103 is great. Well, I think one of the interesting things that we've been seeing, with all of these things, like with Gene Hackman, and that there seems to be an uptick in awareness of neurological disorders with Bruce Willis, with Dad. People are just living so long.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe if Dad had only lived until somewhere in his 70s or 80s, we wouldn't have seen the Alzheimer's manifest to the point where he would have said, I think there's something wrong, and went to the doctor, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I'm assuming that he did not participate in all the proper lifestyle choices, air quotes for people who don't watch the video.
Actually, was very healthy. I mean, he didn't do anything like, I know there are books out there like, Grain Brain and stuff like that. And that guy also wrote a book called An End to Alzheimer's. The guy,
Dr. Bredesen.
yeah, he certainly wasn't going to be like going on an all grain-free diet or anything like that. But he did eat like a Mediterranean diet.
Did he not smoke?
He didn't smoke, but he did it well when he was younger.
No, that's not true. He smoked. He did everything.
Not then he stopped though.
And he stopped.
Yeah. So when he was younger, but when he was diagnosed, he didn't make the huge changes to his diet for a long time. I mean, there came a point that his food got dramatically softer, but he always kind of, in his adult life, from the time that he had stopped doing everything bad for him, he really ate very consistently, Mediterranean diet, and he didn't drink a lot. He would occasionally have a glass of wine, but he was very moderate.
Yeah, just a glass of wine with dinner, that kind of thing.
So none of that rat pack behavior that people think of for that era, the smoking, drinking.
Early on, he did, but then he stopped.
Yeah, there was a lot of, Dad said he was like, they gave us, the first place he ever experienced weed was in the army, because they literally rationed it out to the infantries. Um,
Was this the Korean War?
No, this was World War II.
Okay. I was trying to
Yeah.
do the math in my head. I'm like, it was one of the two.
Yeah, so it was World War II, and they rationed it out, and that's, that was that. He basically smoked nuclear powered jazz musician weed every day from like then, from like when he was 16 until he was like 70 something.
Wow. There's allegedly, well, like allegedly might not be the right word, but there's, um, this one is difficult to remember. There's like there's things in weed that are similar to what's in our brain. So there's supposed to be some really good benefits. I've talked to, I think, 4 guests on like medicinal marijuana. Emphasis on I don't think the high powered stuff you never know, might have helped. Is this
I don't know. I think I do know, actually. I think that, when I have back problems, so when we found out about dad's situation, I was talking to my neurologist, and I said, "Do you work on Alzheimer's?" And she said, "Yeah." And we were talking about all the different stuff with his situation, and I said, "And also the nuclear powered jazz musician weed." And she was like, "Oh, well, there you go." Um, I have noticed with my friends that are on medicinal marijuana for things like cancer, or another friend that's HIV positive, that's, like all that, or that just have pain management problems or things like that, that that the weed helps them a lot. It really does. But it also, um I don't know, I find they can't really process their emotions properly.
That could also be the pain, Joanna, because when you're in pain like that, it's hard. Anyways, it's hard to say what.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
It's
I think,
hard to see what. It's true.
I think, there's pros and cons to all that stuff. I mean, now they're saying too that microdosing is really good for Alzheimer's patients to help them to remember things. Who knows? I think
Yeah.
any, has its place, for certain people. It just depends. I don't know. I'm not a doctor.
I mean, I agree.
I can't pretend to know, but I know that there's, I mean, obviously with the weed, it can make you very forgetful. So, if you're already forgetful, I don't know, I don't know how that would work, how it would help maybe with the anxiety part.
I think it increases anxiety. I think, like there's that paranoid thing. I don't know. I've never been a big pot smoker or anything like that, so I'm not really the one to.
Well, and they tell you like smoking is like the worst thing for you. Like any neurologist that's worth their weight will tell you that's the first thing you got to quit is smoking.
Yeah.
But then then you've got like this whole conversation that we're having. My husband likes his cigars. He doesn't think that that's as bad as cigarettes. I'm like, dude, it's all bad.
To look up how Desi Arnaz died. So, yeah.
And then I don't drink because I like my sugar, and obviously both are bad for your brain. So I try to pick my poisons, and it's easier to control the sugar if I don't also drink. So, when I tell him that, there is no amount of alcohol that's safe on an aging brain, he just dismisses me. It's like, dude, do you think I just made that crap up? It's like, I did not make that up. I'm creative. I'm not that creative. I would assume, but I wouldn't make that statement if I hadn't heard it from reputable sources. So you said you found out about his Alzheimer's when the rest of the world found that must have been tragic.
It was fun. Let me tell you.
I can sort of relate on a much more minor scale. I knew my mom had dementia. I didn't at that time know that dementia was sort of a blanket term for a lot of things. And it wasn't until after my dad died and I was moving her to memory care that I actually got to see her medical documents that said she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in October of 2011. I had assumed that she was formally diagnosed in late summer of 2008 because she went through all the testing to donate a kidney to my dad and was rejected because of cognitive problem. Excuse me.
Interesting.
And by that point, it was like, duh. Like,
Yeah.
like somebody that doesn't know anything about dementia would know something was wrong with her. And so by 2011, it was like, really? And she was 69 and a half at that point. So she technically had younger onset Alzheimer's. It just, you have to be diagnosed before 65. And obviously she wasn't because she was real good at hiding it. Not hiding it, but refusing to do the testing. Do you know what was like the motivation for finally admitting that he had Alzheimer's? Because I mean, there was a whole big thing.
I don't think he really even remembered that he had it. I mean, I know that he knew, but I think probably somebody would say you have it, and he'd be like, I feel fine, for the most part. I think for him, he was fine. Like he just wanted to keep doing what he wanted to do. So as long as he could do that, he felt okay. I know that he had gone, I only know this because it was in a
Article.
interview,
Yeah.
that he had told his wife that he felt like something was wrong. And so then they went to a neurologist. So
Yeah, he couldn't remember the names of his musicians suddenly.
and he always traveled with the same guy.
Yeah, it was a very close relationship.
Yeah, that would be a little disconcerting.
Yeah.
They get to a point where, like, I think there's certain stages that are really hard. Like the early stages when you know this is coming, like the train's coming down the track at you. And then the early middle stages where something's wrong, but you're not like really sure. You just have like this constant confusion. That's got to be awful. Then you get to a point where you just don't remember and you just live in the moment and life is fine. As long as everybody does what you would like them to do, everything is cool.
Yeah.
So that's probably where he got to. But it's just, you mentioned Gene Hackman earlier. And before we were recording, we were talking about this situation. And I had made the comment that I find it very frustrating that his death certificate essentially says he died from heart failure, which is technically true, but it was the Alzheimer's that prevented him from doing the things that would have kept him alive with the heart conditions. And we were talking about how we need a much broader community support because it was just him and his wife, and she was 65. I mean, that's not old, but it's not young. And to have to take care of somebody in their 90s with Alzheimer's disease is exhausting, which is probably why she got sick and died. I don't want to say easily, but you don't hear people dying from hantavirus very often. At least I don't.
No, you don't, but it happens if there's rodents around, and it's just kind of like that was honestly, I think she just pulled a lucky straw, unfortunately. But yeah, as we were discussing before, the situation with Gene Hackman's kind of horrifying to me because for several reasons. But the first reason is, and we've had this kind of unfortunate experience within our own family where, the caretaker closes ranks, doesn't share information. So you understand, I live like literally a 5 to 7 minute walk to my father's house. If she needed something, she could have called me. But these were also in the case of Dad and in the case of Gene Hackman, since we're talking about him, it's like, let's face it, these are rich people, and rich people can have, somebody, even if it's just an assistant, call and check in, go by the house. Do you need anything? They may not have wanted any of that, but it is very I find it very irresponsible that none of that none of those systems were in place.
Yeah, I keep wondering if that was like his choice. He didn't want the world to know, which I get.
I mean, I'm sure, I was at a Tribeca Film Festival luncheon one time with Robert De Niro, and somebody on the other side of me said, what happened to Gene Hackman? Why is he not working? I said, I don't know, but I bet Bob knows. And so we asked him, and he said, that's a really good question. We have the same agent, so I hear about him, but Bob said, I think he just wanted to stop. And that was a good 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So it might have been that he stopped because he was having trouble remembering lines. And that might have been a first clue to a diagnosis, and who knows? But again, it's all just speculation.
Well, the stigma surrounding dementia-causing diseases is definitely, it's going away, could go away a little quicker. When I started my show in 2018, you did not share your loved one's journey on social media. It was just, this was before they had, quote, cancel culture, but that is what would have happened. You would have just been shunned, essentially. And, 2 years later with COVID, now we got people sharing every freaking day, doing lives with one's like, oh my God. And it's good. I don't have a problem with it. It's just, it's interesting that in that short period of time that it improved, but it improved with, like, I'm a Gen Xer and you guys are too, I guess. But it's like the millennials who are a little more social media savvy, and, they didn't seem to fall under that same rule. Cause I kind of felt like I straddled the, thou shalt not share, this is a family thing. And the other side of the coin where people are like, I'm going to share it all. This is my support.
Don't do your dirty laundry in public thing.
Yeah. It's just, I find it really interesting. And in the support group this morning that I facilitate, we are actually talking about this kind of exact same thing about the stigma. As one of the members is newer and they're on the earlier end of the journey, and they're still kind of dealing with stigma being a problem. And one gal was talking about how when she was younger, you didn't use the big C word. You didn't talk about cancer. People called it the big C. And I barely remember that. So we're talking probably 40 plus years ago. And, so I'm assuming in another 10 or so years, it'll probably be that way. We have autism, all the different things that cause dementia, ADHD, ADD, depression. We got all the mental illnesses. We talk about all of it now. So I think the stigma will be greatly reduced, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I think that's
key. With all the funding getting cut,
that's terrifying.
it's terrifying. And, it's also like, who knows with all the funding getting cut. But
I would assume, and I'm not always, I'm usually more pessimistic. I'm assuming that research and that knowledge will go somewhere else, which is detrimental to our country. I think that's terrible. I don't think we're going to lose all of it. We're just going to be, we're not going to be the people coming up with the answer, which is terrible. But
yeah, I think that just on a individual basis, we're going to have to take this stuff into our own hands and make sure that we are communicating and understanding what's happening in Europe, research and study wise, and all those things. Yeah.
I can't imagine the people that, like, I find the brain research fascinating. So I can't imagine the people that are like eyeball deep in trying to solve the problem, the find the cure, whatever. They'll be just like, oh, well, I'll go do something else. I don't think so. That doesn't seem to be the way most brains work. So hopefully, they'll go wherever and we won't suffer too horribly from that. But yeah, it's, it is terrifying. Like I said, I plan on living to be 103. I'd prefer to do it like healthy. If I'm not going to be healthy, then forget the 103. That's pretty much my choices.
Okay. Well, I hope that you live to 103, and I hope, knock on wood, that you're as healthy as possible.
As long as I'm like my paternal grandmother, my Nana, I'll be fine as long as I can see. I don't know how she managed. She was a librarian.
Did she have anything like a dog or assistant or anything like that? No.
And my aunt, she unfortunately burned out my poor aunt. My dad was the oldest of 3 sons, and so my aunt was the wife of the middle son. And no, she was very typical. Family does for family. Did not want to hire any. She had plenty of money. Did not want to hire somebody to, do light housekeeping, drive her places, prepare meals that she could throw in the microwave. Because it's a little hard to cook when you can't see.
Yeah, we're having this issue with our mother, and she can see just fine.
Oh,
It's just that she doesn't want.
and is she in New York?
No, she's in Vegas.
Oh, well, I would think in Vegas there's a lot of options for like many kinds of DoorDash. Unlike where I live, and
There are, but she doesn't know how to like use that kind of. It's more that she needs somebody to help her, make sure she goes to the doctor and make the appointments, and did she get her medication refilled, and all that stuff that's like daunting for an older person. And
we also need, and this is a whole other episode, I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, but we need a whole shift that aging in place, living in my home till I die, should not be the end all be all goal. Like, I do not understand why somebody in their 80s would want a single family home that you got to clean and maintenance and insure and, cook and clean.
On your economic, I mean, in a lot of cases, if you have the financial means, I think it is nice because if you are older and you have around the clock care and somebody's always there, then whenever you need assistance, you'll have it. If you're actually in a facility, you're not going to have somebody designated to you all the time. If you have to get up and go to the bathroom, you have to wait for somebody to come to your room, and you could very easily try to get up yourself and fall in a facility, as you.
but there are also, Antonia, do you remember that place that Aunt Mary was in? That she had a house, and it was like a over 50 active seniors.
That's what I was going to say, is that, but on the flip side of that, it's very important to have community. And so if you are living by yourself and you have community, then maybe that's a good thing. If you don't have community, you have to weigh out all the options. There's not one answer for each person. And I think that it's important to be open-minded.
I think we need far more options. Would help a lot.
There are these places, like our Aunt Mary had a house in one of these places in New Jersey that when it was time, it transitioned into assisted living. So you were in your home and you just got round the clock care when you needed it. And she hospiced it at home that way. And then all of those things. So I think there needs to be more of those facilities. Now, that being said, I have a friend now that had her mother in whose mother was unfortunately in a Medicaid situation in a nursing home, and it was horrifying. Brought her home because the facility said it's time to hospice. She made a miraculous recovery, and now my friend is stuck taking care of her mom. It's like a whole thing 24/7. She can't she had to quit her job, and it's like a whole whatever. But anyway, I'm getting a message from Marlise that Antonia has to go because she's got a really great show she's gonna do tonight.
Awesome.
Right?
Well, I appreciate you guys sharing a little behind the scenes about your dad and talking about, it's different talking to people that have like a famous parent versus like my mom. So it's just always fun to talk to different caregivers and different family members and just learn about everybody's journey. So I really appreciate you guys sharing.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for all of your beautiful insight and stories about your own family.
Thank you.